You're dead weight. My boss built this empire, not you. She said it with a laugh at a board meeting, while squeezing her boss's hand like it was a goddamn engagement announcement. Silence. The kind that eats oxygen. 20 faces on the Zoom call, some blinking in disbelief, others frozen like their Wi-Fi had cut out. But no, they'd heard her. Everyone had. Every partner, every investor, every senior manager logged in from their glass offices and home setups across 3 time zones. Even the assistant who accidentally left his mic unmuted and whispered, "Holy SH." I didn't flinch, didn't speak, just looked at her, my wife, COO of the $15 million tech firm I'd built from the concrete up, and then at him. Shiny watch, no tie, overly white teeth. I stood, straightened my jacket, and walked out. Not a dramatic exit. No slam doors. No comeback line. Just a nod. The kind you give right before you pull the lever on a trap someone else forgot they set off. That was Thursday, 3:24 p.m. The betrayal didn't start in that boardroom. That was just when the infection decided to show its face. The real rot had been spreading quietly, long before she promoted herself from partner to parasite. I wasn't surprised. A month earlier, I found a receipt in our recycling bin. Black Amex. 2-person dinner. A wine pairing menu I never saw. She told me it was a vendor dinner. The vendor must have had a square jaw and perfect hair, because when I checked our CRM, that company had never existed. You're just paranoid, she said, tossing her heels by the door like nothing happened. It's all your work, this constant suspicion. Right. My work. She blamed the 12-hour days I pulled for her wardrobe expansion and his tan lines. But here's the thing about paranoia. When you've seen enough knives, you start counting the handles before the blades appear. What happened in that boardroom wasn't a betrayal. It was a declaration. She chose him, in front of everyone. And I let her, because I'd already chosen something else. And listen, before we go further, I'm only telling this because I know 90% of you are going to listen to this whole story without hitting subscribe. But if you do subscribe, you're helping the team here keep telling stories they don't teach in business school. Stories where people like her get exactly what they pretend they're immune to. Now back to that laugh. After I left, I went home. I didn't pack. I didn't cry. I didn't even change my clothes. I just sat at the edge of the guest bed, pulled open the drawer of my filing cabinet, and took out the hard case labeled Lens. A name only I understood. Inside, a secure USB, a burner phone with one contact, and a notarized envelope I'd had prepped 8 months ago. Sealed, numbered, dated. I placed the envelope on the center of the kitchen table. Didn't write a note. Didn't need to. She came home around 9:40 p.m. Smelled like gin, victory, and narcissism. She walked past me, heels clicking against the tile like a clock counting down. Glanced at the envelope. Laughed again. What is this? Divorce threats already? You should have stayed in the room if you wanted to look strong. I didn't respond. She poured a drink. Skipped dinner. Put on music. Some smug remix of a Fleetwood Mac song. Fitting. By 11 p.m., she was in bed. By 11:03, I was 5 floors below sea level, inside a cold server room with 2 biometric locks and a backup generator that could run 6 months off-grid. My fingerprints were still in the system. Hers weren't. I slid in the USB. Watched the files load. Timestamps, access logs, backdated contracts, wire transfer records, and a trove of test invoices billed to companies that only existed on paper. But the real prize? A compliance audit, commissioned by me, performed by a third party in Zurich, notarized in person by a former DOJ analyst. Its contents were so dry they could pass a polygraph. And buried in the appendix, a VPN trace showing repeated after-hours edits to investor projections. Guess which office the IP pointed to? Her boss's. Her new hand-holding, credit-stealing, soon-to-be federal defendant boss. She thought that boardroom was a coup, that she was starring in some corporate fairy tale. She didn't realize I wrote the ending 9 months ago, and the next chapter starts when someone opens that envelope. She came home humming like she'd won something. Not in the literal sense. There was no trophy in her hands, no plaque or title she hadn't already printed for herself months earlier. But the look in her eyes? That smug, floaty euphoria people where after crossing a line they thought was untouchable and realizing no one slapped their wrist. That's what she came home with. Like she'd walked off the set of a victory speech no one else had rehearsed for. She didn't even notice the difference at first. That the apartment was cleaner. Stripped, really. My desk, empty. The framed photo of our first investor pitch in Milan, gone. No laptop. No coffee mug with the chip on the handle. Just one thing remained. A sealed black envelope, thick and matte, resting dead center on the desk like a ritual object. She leaned in, read the label, smirked. In case of betrayal, activate. Oh, dramatic, she chuckled, tossing her keys into the dish beside it like it was just another passive-aggressive note I'd written in a moment of emotional indigestion. She didn't even touch it. Instead, she opened a bottle of Pinot Grigio, one of the expensive ones I stopped buying after she stopped asking how my day was. She FaceTimed him, the boss, and called it a debrief. That's what she whispered into the phone before giggling. It's a debrief, not a date. Well, maybe a little of both. I watched from the building's secondary access camera feed. She had no idea. She'd never asked why I upgraded our security system, or why I insisted the wiring pass through the sub-basement junction, or that I installed a mirrored connection between our apartment feed and my remote cloud logs. I wasn't watching out of pain. I was documenting, observing. Coldly, she poured wine, curled her legs under her like some 20-something influencer, and flattered him with lines I'd once thought were hers. He asked if I'd finally broken. She laughed. He'll crawl back. He always does. I give him 4 days max. He's emotionally addicted to control. He asked about the envelope. Oh, that. Probably another lecture. Or some silly clause from that prenup he pretends still matters. He forgets. I'm the one holding the reins now. That made me laugh. Quietly. Without sound. I was in a secure facility by then. One of our satellite locations technically owned by a shell company I set up before we even got married. She thought she knew every asset I had. She didn't know about Vault 3. Inside, temperature-controlled servers, air-gapped drives, notarized chains of custody for every critical transaction from the last 6 fiscal quarters. No passwords. Everything biometric. Retinal scan, fingerprint, heartbeat rhythm. Each one tied to me, and only me. I authenticated. Pulled up the folder labeled Echo_Real. Echo_Real contains 6 subdirectories. Audio logs from planning meetings where her boss casually suggested reclassifying partner dividends as consultant fees to skirt the SEC cap. Video screen captures of late-night adjustments to Q2 revenue projections, traced through his credentials, using her machine. Email drafts, never sent, where she'd rehearsed a press leak blaming me for toxic leadership in case she needed an exit strategy. A silent screen recording of her looking directly into the webcam at 2:14 a.m. on a Sunday, whispering, "He doesn't know I'm deleting the cap table backups." A signed internal memo, initialed by both of them, authorizing a restricted stock issue to an offshore trust, one that matched an entity I'd been tracking for 6 months. A scanned napkin, from a dinner in Geneva. His handwriting, her lipstick. One sentence, D gets out, or we take him out. Each file had a timestamp. Each one was redundantly mirrored to 3 cloud services, a legal escrow service in British Columbia, and a Swiss insurance agency specializing in whistleblower protections. I had backups of backups, not because I was scared, but because I knew they weren't careful. She thought betrayal was a performance, something you could rehearse, stage, and smile through. I knew betrayal was a transaction, and I had every receipt. That night, she went to bed, still laughing at some meme he sent. Probably something smug about outgrowing your past, about shedding old partners. She didn't know that while she slept, my legal team was already reviewing Clause 14 of our founder agreement, or that her boss's name had just been flagged on a private list shared between SEC Internal Affairs and a federal prosecutor I'd met once at a silent auction. She didn't open the envelope, but someone else would. His name was Connor Bray. You wouldn't notice him in a crowd. Trim haircut, dark suit, no brand markings, no tie. Just a soft-spoken presence that didn't ask to be remembered, which, in his line of work, was exactly the point. We met in a private conference room beneath an anonymous law firm in San Jose. One of those buildings you drive by 1,000 times but never really see. No signage, no lobby music, just a buzzer that led to an elevator without buttons, because only they controlled where it stopped. Connor didn't shake my hand when I entered. He just nodded and gestured to the chair across from him. A single folder sat between us. Cream-colored, unlabeled. I already knew what was inside. I reviewed the data sets, he said. Did a quick cross-reference with public filings, timestamp metadata, and third-party disclosures. He slid the folder an inch closer to me, then flipped it open with one finger. First page, a fabricated investor update from 8 months ago. Claimed $1.2 million in new capital from a group that didn't exist. The real funding had dried up 2 months earlier, but the false injection had kept the board quiet, and the quarterly bonuses flowing. Second page, a contract, dated 2 weeks before it was ever written. signed by one of our mid-level advisors who'd been on medical leave in Barcelona at the time. A clear forgery. Subtle, but time-stamped log showed the document was saved on her boss's machine the same night it was allegedly scanned and signed. Third, a list of consultants. 10 names. 6 real, for ghosts. All paid monthly. All pulled from the same budget line. And every payment routed through one of 3 shell vendors. The trail was deliberately fuzzy. Until it wasn't. Connor tapped the 4th sheet. This one's the problem. It was a VPN access report, internal. Someone had logged into our internal cap table management system 27 times after hours, using an IP trace to the secondary office suite, the one only executive leadership had keys to. The account used was technically his, but the login credentials were tied to a machine assigned to her. He leaned back. This doesn't look like creative accounting. This looks like systemic concealment. If you push this forward, you're not just talking marital breach. You're talking federal fraud, securities violations, potential RICO exposure depending on how far the consultant pipeline goes. I didn't blink. What happens if I don't push it? He gave a dry smile. Then it'll all come out anyway. But on their timeline, under their narrative, and your name gets stapled to the wreckage. That's what they never understand. People like her and people like him. They think silence means weakness. That not reacting in the moment means you're confused, lost. That walking out of a boardroom without raising your voice is the same as surrender. No. Sometimes silence is where you load the next chamber. I nodded once. Package it. We send it sealed. Full legal trail. He already had. Connor slid a USB drive across the table. This contains a hash-locked version of the files. Encrypted. Mirrored to my firm's vault and notarized this morning at 9:42. I assume you have your own counsel for delivery? I did. More than one, actually. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I didn't trust anyone anymore. My next call wasn't to my wife. It wasn't to my investors. It was to the attorney I'd kept on a quiet retainer since the day we crossed $5 million ARR. He handled what we called insurance projects. Structurally boring. Legally lethal. I didn't give him context. Just the phrase. Echo_real is green. Begin protocol L. His voice didn't change. Understood. By the time I left the building, 7 duplicate envelopes had already been couriered to 7 people. A forensic accountant in Virginia, a former compliance director turned private consultant in Chicago, a university professor who once helped dismantle a biotech fraud ring in Austin, and 4 others you wouldn't find on LinkedIn. Each of them had been paid long ago. Not to act, but to hold. Until the moment arrived. Until the evidence became a bullet, not a file. I stepped into the cold, checked my watch. It was just past 7 p.m. In a few hours, my wife would post some smug Instagram story, champagne glasses clinking with her minter. A skyline. A quote about being reborn through disruption. She thought the audit was about money. It wasn't. It was about who legally built this company, and who legally just handed me their head on a silver plate. The thing about lawsuits is that they're noisy. Headlines, tweets, rumors in Slack channels. But legal preparation? That's silent. That's where the real warfare happens. In rooms no one walks into without a keycard, around tables where words like irreparable harm and malicious attribution get passed around like napkins. I made 4 calls that night. Not to friends. Not to family. To handlers. That's what I call them, because they're not just attorneys. They're experts in pre-litigation containment, high-net-worth structural defense, and, when necessary, reputational euthanasia. Not for me. For the people who bet against me. Call 1. To Elaine Wexler, estate law pit viper with a photographic memory and a moral compass so broken she once smiled while discussing accidental asset erosion. She handled my prenup review. Clause 9 triggers on reputational defamation, she said, barely letting me say hello. Publicly stated, in front of board members and investors, claiming you didn't build the company. That's a qualifying breach of fiduciary representation combined with marital sabotage. You're clean. Trigger it. She chuckled. Already did. Her equity freezes at midnight. She'll see a weird delay in her vesting dashboard tomorrow. Just act surprised. Call 2. Nathaniel Sung, corporate IP specialist who worked with me to bury our tech stack's true patent lineage behind 3 LLCs and a Delaware-based research collective. Most people think our AI architecture was jointly developed. It wasn't. IP status? I asked. Yours. All of it. She signed away co-development rights 3 years ago in the Series B funding cycle. Remember that merger clause I buried in the repapering? Perfect. Call 3. My offshore trustee. Yes, offshore. Yes, entirely legal. And yes, surgically firewalled against spousal claims. The moment Elaine greenlit the prenup clause, the trustee locked the vault. Every equity holding I had was now held in a staggered trust. 3 beneficiaries, none of them her. And the 4th call? That one was just for pleasure. Send the packet. I told Marcus, my audit liaison. Board only. No CCs, physical delivery. Priority red seal. And the note, make sure it's handwritten. He paused. You want handwritten? Absolutely. 1 sentence. If you wish to avoid shareholder exposure, read this before Friday. No signature. No name. He whistled. Subtle. No. Surgical. By dawn, 7 documents were in motion. A cease and desist letter drafted for preemptive PR sabotage, should she or her boss try to spin a narrative. A sealed brief prepared for Delaware Chancery Court, pre-filled but undated, accusing the COO of executive misrepresentation. A trust movement order timestamped, notarized, and ready to be used if any of her team tried to file a joint financial disclosure. An email drafted but unsent, saved in my board portal. A resignation letter with a clause that would force a hostile audit on exit. A compliance red flag added to our internal dashboard, tied to any transaction above $10,000 touching accounts associated with her or her boss. A second envelope, twin to the first, now sitting in the inbox of our internal auditor, anonymous source named only Sable. And finally, a quiet retainer increase to my crisis PR firm, because by Monday, we'd be playing chess in front of cameras. I didn't sleep, not because I was spiraling, but because the engine was running too smoothly to shut down. She had no idea. In her mind, I was still licking wounds, nursing a bruised ego, trying to prove I mattered. That's what she said in a voice note I intercepted, sent to a mutual friend who used to be mine until she made him hers. He's probably in his little man cave right now, cataloging reasons why I betrayed him. I mean, maybe he built the foundation, but real growth? Real vision? That was Andrew. Andrew. That's his name. The man whose hand she held while she erased mine. And yet Andrew had no idea that our internal board audit had been quietly scheduled for Friday at 4 p.m., nor that he'd been mentioned in a footnote by our legal analyst months earlier after a flagged expense report showed duplicate vendor payments from 2 shell corporations linked to his prior venture. This wasn't a revenge story. It was an autopsy. They just hadn't realized the body on the table was theirs. There's a moment, just before you pull the trigger on a missile strike, when the entire control room goes silent. No alarms. No flashing lights. Just a quiet acceptance that the damage is no longer theoretical. That's what it felt like when I clicked submit on the SEC whistleblower portal. Not anonymously. No burner accounts. No fake names. I wanted my signature on it. I needed them to know exactly who brought the match. The federal system is sterile by design. Bland fonts, government grays, bureaucratic drop-downs that make you feel like nothing important could possibly happen here. But once you cross the threshold, once you check the box that says, yes, I acknowledge this submission is made under penalty of perjury, you're no longer speculating. You're detonating. The upload field blinked once. Then again, file transfer complete. 2.7 gigabytes of data. Encrypted. Timestamped. Notarized. Cross-referenced with blockchain verification because I don't believe in leaving trails that can be rewritten. The first file, a screen recording. Her boss, standing at the glass wall of our downtown office, pacing while dictating. His voice low, smug. If we route the comp through the shell as deferred consulting, it's technically not declared income until post-vesting. He'll never see it. He only checks the finalized disbursement tables. Keep the stub data off the executive ledger. Got it. She's off camera, but audible. So I just mirror the entries in the shadow copy and delete the sync schedule? He smirks. Exactly. You're learning. That alone was bad. Coaching an executive to falsify comp logs is prison bad. But that was the warm-up. Second file, an email thread, dated 4 weeks before our IPO filing. Subject, Q4 growth, revised projections for optics. It was forwarded between them multiple times, each version with edits to inflate user acquisition, massage churn rates, and bury a failed integration that cost us nearly $1.4 million. The final version was labeled Board Clean. Guess which version made it into the investor packet? Third file, a zipped folder of backend logs. Raw data from our analytics dashboard. I preserved them using a silent clone protocol I built in grad school, one that copied every database change in real time. Every deletion, every falsified entry, every after-hours edit was there, color-coded and time-stamped. Then came the kill shot, a notarized deposition from a junior analyst. An intern, really. She'd come to me 6 months earlier, shaken, said she was asked to revise some reports she didn't understand. I'd offered to help her switch departments. Quietly, she did, but not before I had her record a statement, reviewed and signed by my legal counsel. In it, she describes being pressured by the COO, my wife, and Andrew, her boss, to run optimistic simulations and overwrite the original batch. She didn't even know it was fraud. She thought it was normal. It wasn't. And I made sure the feds would know that. The portal thanked me for my submission with a robotic line. Your complaint will be reviewed in accordance with standard timelines. Standard timelines. That made me laugh out loud in my car. The idea that anything about this situation was standard. I was parked 3 blocks from their favorite rooftop bar. I knew they'd be there tonight. Celebrating. Drinking overpriced Negronis. Maybe even planning the next pivot in our roadmap while I was, in their minds, licking my wounds over takeout Thai and unsent texts. They didn't know that while they toasted the next chapter, I'd just dropped a sealed package in a physical Dropbox for a federal compliance partner based in D.C. A package that mirrored everything I submitted online, with one addition. A hand-signed letter offering myself as a cooperative witness, including a list of names and contacts for cross-validation. I didn't care if it made headlines. I wasn't looking for exposure. I wanted containment. Precise, legal, surgical, the kind of containment that starts with subpoenas and ends with shareholder revolts. I drove past the bar on my way home, saw her on the balcony, silhouetted in the ambient glow of fairy lights and ego. Glass raised, laughing. She thought the game was over. She didn't realize it had just gone federal. The rooftop was a 27th floor fever dream. Glass railing, string lights, imported orchids that wilted in the LA heat but looked great in photos. It was the kind of place you booked when you wanted to appear generous while quietly reminding everyone they couldn't afford to reciprocate. That night, she wore a black silk dress with sleeves too long and a slit too high, laughing louder than she had in years, like someone finally relieved of dead weight. There were 11 of them. Executives, strategic partners, one influencer whose presence guaranteed at least 5 Instagram stories tagged #ExitEnergy or some equally soulless phrase. My wife. No, the COO now, sat at the center of it all, flanked by her new king and the VCs who'd never liked me but loved the optics of a female founder finally stepping into her own. The wine was Chateau something, the kind they pretend to taste berries and war history in. She didn't know I'd been invited to the private launch of that rooftop 6 months earlier by the architect who now sat quietly reading my email from that morning. He wasn't there to party. He was there to watch. The toast came after the second course, figs and roasted duck and hollow clapping. To the future, she said, rising with her glass. To fearless leadership. To cutting loose the things that no longer move us forward. She glanced at Andrew, her boss, her shadow emperor, who raised his own glass and added with a smirk, "He won't last a week." Laughter. Chum glasses. A friend made a joke about offering me a job after the dust settled. Even she laughed at that. But then came the pause. It started as a flicker, just a shift in posture. One of the younger VCs, mid-30s, thick-rimmed glasses and a habit of checking news alerts compulsively, glanced at his phone and stopped mid-sip. Andrew," he said, eyes narrowing. Andrew turned, wine still in hand. "Yeah." The VC rotated his phone, screen facing up. "Why is your name in this SEC report?" Silence. Real silence this time. You could hear the hum of the rooftop AC, the distant blare of a horn 27 stories below. Then, the faint buzz of phones vibrating. Notifications cascading. One by one, they reached for their devices. Andrew's glass hit the table. Not shattered. Just hard enough to signal everything had tilted. "What the hell?" he muttered, scrolling fast. Then slower. His face paled. Not dramatically, just enough to drain the usual orange-tint confidence from his skin. She leaned in. What? What is it?" He didn't answer. Someone else did. This says there's a whistleblower case. SEC Federal. Alleging securities fraud. Misstated growth projections. Executive comp concealment. Shell consultants. Another guest. They have names. Your names. The influencer girl, who had spent most of the night photographing her risotto, blinked. "Wait. You guys are in that report." Still, no answer. Andrew stood slowly. He held his phone like it was burning his hand. A single line glowed on the screen, the quote already pulled into headlines by hungry journalists. "If you wish to avoid shareholder exposure, read this before Friday." Where did they get this? He whispered. He looked at her now, really looked at her. Not with desire, not with admiration, but calculation, as if trying to determine whether she'd known, whether she'd somehow slipped, whether she had been careless. But the thing was, she hadn't been careless. She'd been arrogant. She truly believed the man she called dead weight wouldn't have the spine to retaliate. She thought public embarrassment neutered capability, that just because I didn't scream, I didn't plan. She tried to speak. Look, this is just noise. It's a power move. He's trying to save face. It's posturing. But no one was listening anymore. Phones were out. Emails being forwarded. Links flying across encrypted chats. One of the VCs was already texting their compliance officer. Another quietly closed his leather folio and excused himself with a muttered, "Thanks for dinner." Andrew stayed standing, lips moving but no words coming out. And she, still holding her glass, finally set it down. Not because she was done drinking, because her hands had started to shake. 11:52 p.m. The phone didn't ring so much as it punched through the room. One of those calls you don't just ignore, because it comes from a number that usually goes through 2 assistants, 3 calendar permissions, and an attorney before it ever hits your screen. Andrew's board chairman never called directly. Never. He was the kind of man who spoke in proxies. But tonight, the call came straight to Andrew's personal line. He sat up in bed before he answered. Not out of manners, out of instinct. Like a dog hearing thunder before the storm arrives. Hello. The voice on the other end wasn't angry. It was worse, measured. Andrew, you'll be in the downtown office at 7:30 tomorrow morning. Bring your legal counsel. You are not to contact any staff tonight. Subpoenas are being finalized as we speak. FBI compliance liaison will be present. Pause. Do you understand? Andrew started to respond. Wait, hang on, what? Click. The line went dead. He stared at the screen like it had betrayed him. Beside him, half awake and groggy, she rolled over. Who was that? He didn't answer. She rubbed her eyes. Seriously, what's going on? He stood up, walked around the room, phone still in hand, sweat beginning to prick at the collarbone despite the AC being set to 68. She sat up, sheets tangled around her like vines. Andrew, talk to me. He turned slowly, his expression cracked porcelain now. That was Harold. Your chairman? He nodded once. She blinked. Why the hell is he calling you at midnight? He opened his mouth like he was about to explain something, then closed it again. No words. Just this slow, suffocating realization that the walls were not just closing, they had already closed. She slipped out of bed. Okay, I'm going to need you to say something, because you're scaring me. He finally looked at her. They're calling an emergency audit, he said. Her breath hitched. What kind of audit? The kind where subpoenas are delivered before the coffee shows up. She wrapped the robe around her. Jesus Christ. What? He didn't answer that either. Instead, he walked over to the desk in the corner, opened his laptop. Every alert was lit up, Slack threads gone quiet, but encrypted email chains blowing up like wildfire. One from their general counsel. Need to speak immediately. FBI contact has reached out via formal channel. Urgent. Another, from their external auditor. Multiple filings being questioned. Q4 projections. Also concerns raised executive comp structure flagged as off books. And finally, an email from his own CFO, subject line in all caps. Did you know Daniel submitted a federal whistleblower file? He whispered it without meaning to. He went federal. She froze. What did Daniel do? Still no answer. She crossed the room, grabbing her phone, starting to panic scroll. Her news feed was already surfacing breadcrumbs. Industry blogs whispering about fraud probes, Twitter accounts speculating on fake users, early-stage investors dropping vague posts about integrity in tech leadership. And there, right in the middle of a thread, was her name. Not tagged, just mentioned. COO Midpoint Systems. A source close to the matter confirmed her presence in board meetings where irregular metrics were discussed. She looked up at Andrew. You said none of this would trace back. He was still staring at the emails. He had everything. He timed it. We were celebrating, and he was pulling the trigger. He can't prove anything, she hissed. But she already knew that was a lie. She just didn't know how much he could prove. Andrew walked into the bathroom without a word and shut the door behind him. The faucet ran, pointlessly. Not shaving, not brushing, just running, like it would drown out the questions. She stood alone in the middle of a room that suddenly felt much larger. Colder, more exposed. The illusion was fracturing. And Daniel? He still hadn't said a word. 7:10 a.m. Not a second earlier. Not a second later. The kind of timing that tells you this wasn't a scramble. This was scheduled. Engineered. like a silent missile strike choreographed by people who don't make mistakes. The knock, no, pounding, on the front door didn't sound human. It was blunt, repetitive, calculated, not urgent, not angry, just certain. Andrew jolted upright, still in yesterday's clothes. Shirt wrinkled, belt half undone. His laptop lay beside him on the couch, still open to an unread Slack message. We're being asked to preserve all internal communications effective immediately. She stood behind him, hair damp, robe tightened so hard the sash was cutting into her side. The pounding came again, louder this time. Then a voice, not shouting, but projecting. Mr. Voss, open the door, please. Legal service delivery. Authorized federal escort is present. He froze. She whispered, oh my God. He moved like a man walking to his own execution, slow, deliberate, still trying to figure out if there was a chance this was all just a misfire. A mix-up. Maybe Daniel bluffed. Maybe this was a scare tactic. But when he opened the door, 7 attorneys stood in the hallway, flanked by a tall man in a charcoal suit with an FBI badge clipped casually to his blazer. Not waved, not flashed, just there, like gravity. 2 members of Andrew's own board stood behind them, one with a sealed folder in hand, the other with a look that said, we gave you a chance. Mr. Voss, one of the attorneys said, nodding. You're being served notice of internal audit review under emergency compliance proceedings. You are not under arrest, but you are advised to remain on premises until counsel confirms custodial limitations. The FBI liaison didn't speak. He just stepped forward, handed over a heavy binder, and stepped back. No one raised a voice, because they didn't have to. Andrew took the binder with both hands like it might explode. He opened it slowly. First page, a printed screenshot of an internal invoice, dated 6 months earlier, marked paid, but never processed through official accounts. The recipient, a non-existent firm called Lutronix Consulting. The signatory, Andrew Voss. His name, his digital signature. He looked up, but they were already watching him turn the page. Second, a printout of wire transfer logs. Small amounts, $30K, $45,000, $50,000, but frequent. All routed through a chain of intermediary banks, landing eventually in a holding account based in the Cayman Islands. The account name matched one registered to an executive trust from Andrew's previous company, the one he swore he'd severed ties with. Third, the compliance log. Timestamps, IP addresses, device IDs, and her fingerprint. Literally, a captured biometric access key used at 2:41 a.m. from her secured device, used to bypass data retention policies and wipe old executive summaries. What she didn't know was that Daniel had upgraded the system with a silent verification layer. It didn't stop the wipe, it just logged who did it. Andrew didn't say anything, didn't even flip the 4th page. He just sat down, right there, in the middle of his own entryway, back against the doorframe, binder sliding off his lap, breathing shallow. She hovered behind him, eyes darting across the faces in the hallway. We didn't. He's exaggerating. This is all taken out of context. But no one was looking at her, because none of them needed her anymore. The board member with the sealed folder stepped forward, held it out. You're to appear at the downtown office by 7:30. Legal counsel is expected. Your devices will be temporarily restricted from all company systems as of 5 minutes ago. Andrew didn't take the folder, so they dropped it at his feet. Then, like clockwork, they turned and left. No yelling, no confrontation, just exit. The door closed slowly behind them with the soft hiss of air-sealed defeat. He didn't move, not for minutes. When he finally looked up, his face had collapsed in on itself, not from rage, not even fear, just the horror of realization. He wasn't at the center of a power play anymore. He was at the center of a case file. She knelt beside him, gripping his arm. Say something. He blinked slowly, like surfacing from water. He had everything, he murmured. He didn't just plan this. He timed it. He waited until we were in too deep to explain our way out. Her voice cracked. What are we supposed to do now? He didn't respond, because there wasn't a we anymore. There was just fallout. The meeting was set for 3 p.m. sharp. Private link. End-to-end encrypted. Board-only access. Dial-in permissions locked to verified biometrics. No observers. No assistants. No distractions. But not everyone was in the same room. Andrew sat alone in the West Conference chamber of his own building, a half-empty bottle of antacids beside him. His phone had been seized by internal counsel that morning. His laptop, still on lockdown. All notes taken by hand now. On a yellow legal pad where he'd written the phrase, Option A, Cooperate, in all caps, and underlined it 4 times. She watched from a borrowed office 1 floor below, flanked by a HR rep and a legal observer. They told her it was standard protocol. She knew it was a holding cell with Wi-Fi. And me? I sat in a private room at a partner law firm 2 cities over. Not because I had to, because I could. I logged in at 2:58. Waited in silence. At 3:02, the chairman began. Today's emergency session has been convened to discuss the recent compliance disclosures submitted by our founding partner, Mr. Daniel Rhodes. All materials have been reviewed by our internal audit committee and verified independently by 2 third-party legal firms. No small talk, no intros, just execution, one by one. The board members confirmed they had reviewed the packet, the red folders that arrived that morning. Inside, a complete timeline of transactions, quotes, memos, altered projections, and of course, the forensic traces that tied it all together. Andrew was asked to respond. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He'd been advised not to speak. Smart, for once. The chairman continued. Effective immediately, Mr. Voss, your duties as interim CTO are suspended pending completion of the federal audit. You are instructed to abstain from all company communications except through approved legal channels. A simple sentence, but it sounded like a tombstone being engraved in real time. Then the chairman turned to me. Mr. Rhodes, as primary founder and original architect of our IP, we invite your recommendations for immediate operational continuity. I clicked unmute. No smile, just precision. We begin with removing conflict of interest, I said, and dead weight. A few board members raised their brows. A few smirked. Andrew didn't move. She, from her 1 floor down exile, gripped the chair arm. I continued. All joint initiatives led by Mr. Voss and the COO will be paused. Their teams will report directly to the executive audit liaison. I will appoint interim tech and operations leads within the hour. The COO will be placed on immediate leave. Gasps weren't audible, but you could feel them. Little delays in breath over the line. The HR observer beside her made a quiet note. The legal rep stood up and left the room without a word. Her screen flickered. Connection to the company Slack, revoked. Company email, locked. Calendar access, gone. She refreshed, twice. Nothing. The board chair concluded. All in favor of the motion to reinstate Mr. Rhodes as executive director with full operational oversight. Every hand went up. Unanimous. No abstentions. No polite delays. No deals. I gave a nod. The camera cut away. She stared at her screen, watching everything blink out like a dying power grid. Her name, once pinned at the top of the org chart, was now a placeholder in a pending HR file. She stood, numb, half expecting someone to stop her. To object. To say this was just temporary. But no one did. Because I hadn't just taken back the company. I'd taken back the narrative. And the woman who'd once laughed in a boardroom as she squeezed another man's hand, she now stood alone, holding no one's. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for the cleanup to go from rumor to resolution. The internal memo landed quietly on a Thursday morning, marked confidential, structural transition strategy. No subject line. Just a link to a secure PDF and a mandatory company-wide read receipt. Inside, 2 things stood out. First, a list of personnel terminations, direct, final, no room for negotiation. Effective immediately. Title stripped. Email accounts decommissioned. Building access revoked. Second, a chart showing organizational restructuring. The old CTO box, gone. The COO role, reclassified into 2 separate functions, operations and compliance, neither of which carried her name. At the bottom, a clause highlighted in red. Following an internal audit and subsequent external inquiry, all equity previously assigned to parties involved in the misconduct has been forfeited under Clause 14 of the Executive Agreement. Malicious misrepresentation of attribution. Clause 14. That one hit hard. Because she wrote it. She insisted on its language back when we were drafting the Executive Code of Conduct together. She said, if anyone ever tries to take credit for work they didn't do, there should be blood in the water. She meant it as a threat to outsiders. She didn't realize she was carving her own noose. The final notice came that same morning, delivered by courier. Plain envelope. Heavy cream cardstock, embossed with the company's seal. She opened it with shaking hands. 3 lines. That's all it took to collapse the illusion. 1. Your employment with company name is hereby terminated for cause, effective immediately. 2. All unvested equity, performance bonuses, and leadership entitlements are nullified under Sections 7 and 14 of your executive agreement. 3. You are barred from representing your prior affiliation with this firm in any public or private capacity pending the outcome of active investigations. Then, beneath the legal text, one final line. Handwritten. Just 5 words. You didn't build this. You just tried to steal it. She screamed. Not cried. Not gasped. Screamed. A primal, feral noise ripped from a throat that had never been trained for failure. It echoed through the sterile penthouse she once called their empire, now stripped of its king, its title, its protections. No one heard it. Or if they did, they pretended not to. Andrew? Still under federal review. Passport suspended. Assets frozen pending asset forfeiture case. Last seen entering a glass tower in silence with 2 attorneys and a federal compliance officer in tow. He hadn't posted since the rooftop dinner. Most assumed he was already gone. And Daniel? He didn't show up on social. Didn't gloat. Didn't do a single interview. He simply reappeared one day, in a different office, smaller, warmer, deliberately understated. Glass walls, but curtains drawn. No press. No welcome party. Just him. A desk. A single photo. An early product schematic. The one he sketched by hand before anyone else believed in it. He sat behind the desk quietly, reviewing a document. A new partnership deal. Quiet capital. Forward-facing. Someone once asked if he ever released a statement. He didn't. He didn't need to. Because the silence was the statement.